Hello there. Do you remember when doctors used to make house calls? Well, I can. Throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, up until the early 1970s, we had one doctor who would make house calls. Of course, he's long gone now, but my mom had asthma pretty bad, and she used to have to get asthma shots in order so she can breathe. So he would come to the house, and sometimes he'd have to come 3 or 4 nights in 1 week. She'd get it bad at night with the night air and everything. Especially in the 1950s and the 1960s. Those were her bad years. Later on, in the 70s and 80s, she seemed to do a lot better, and just the inhaler was all as necessary. But he was an old country doctor, an old German fella. Now, we moved in various different places. So when we lived up in this side of the river, I should say, we lived as far as 10 miles away from the doctor's office, but yet he'd come all the way out, and I don't remember what he would charge. It wasn't very much at all. It was $5 or something like that to come out there and give her asthma shot, all the way out in a town about 10 miles away from his office. And of course, when we moved in town here, he would come when he's needed, and there were some exceptions, of course. So when she got her asthma attack on a Sunday or something like that, well, in the early 70s, he would just say, well, you have to go to the emergency room, because he wasn't going to make any calls on the weekends. And at that time, he was in his 80s, and he was trying to cut back on the calls and stuff like that. But you won't get any doctors nowadays that will come to the house. It just isn't going to happen. And so those are days that I remember when I was very young. Also remember movies costing under $1 to go in. And I discussed this on other videos, of course. I haven't been to a movie since the movie The Titanic came out. It was the last time I went to a movie. I will not pay these outrageous prices to see one movie. Back when I was a kid, you'd get 2 full-length features and cartoons in between, and it would cost you, well, when I was a kid, it would cost me like 35 cents or 50 cents. And then in later years, of course, in the 60s, they went up to like $1 for, at that time I was an adult, so it cost $1 to get in. Well, that wasn't a bad deal. I guess at the time I was complaining about it, but $1, I wish there was $1 nowadays. And then you'd get sometimes 1 or 2 movies, but the old days of getting 2 full-length features, usually westerns I'd go see, and one of them was Old Yeller at that time, but you'd get 2 westerns and several cartoons in between. So you'd spend a whole Saturday afternoon at the movies. But now, no, I don't go to movies. I'll buy the DVD and I'll watch it on television. So I have to wait 6 months or 9 months or whatever it is for the movie to be released on DVD. So what, So that's what I did with Gran Torino. I wasn't going to go pay those outrageous prices to see Clint Eastwood and Gran Torino. So just waited till it come out on DVD. I got it on DVD. I watched it. Hey, maybe 6 months from now I might want to drag it out again and watch it again. You can't do that when it's in the movies. We used to have matinees also. In the 60s and 70s, a matinee, of course, would be usually like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. And those would be much cheaper than the evening rates. Do you remember taking the city bus? Well, I remember. Back before I was driving, I'd take the city bus. I'd take the city bus. I lived in New Haven. And when I was putting on these little film shows I was telling you about, the cartoons and Tom Mix on one of my videos, I described that. Well, I used to take the city bus down to downtown New Haven to borrow the, rent the, you know, how should I say, take out the film from the library, and even had bought some films. They were little highlight films, like 50-foot spools of 16 millimeter silent movie film that I'd buy once in a while and bring them home and play them for myself and for the kids my age in the neighborhood, as through my hand crank Keystone projector, which I showed you in one of my other videos. Well, it cost me 15 cents to go on the bus back then. That was 1958-59. 15 cents to go on a city bus. And you'd get a transfer. You remember transfers? If you needed to go on another bus in another part of the city, the guy would have this thing in, right now. I don't even know if their buses still have them, because I haven't been on a city bus in 40 years, and that's no lie. But they used to have this big glass thing. It looked similar to, well, look, it had a glass on top like this here. Well, you'd put your money in, you'd drop it in, he'd look in there, and you'd crank and crank and crank and drop the money, you know, money would fall down into the box. You know, and he'd be... You'd put your money in, you'd drop it in, he'd look in there, and you'd crank and crank and crank and drop the money, you know, money would fall down into the box. You know, and he'd be cranking that every once in a while when it got too many coins in there. And so when you drop your 15 cents in, he could plainly see you put 15 cents in, you can go in the back of the bus. Those were the days when it, you know, and 15 cents was nothing. Well, I remember one time I wanted to buy a movie film, Tom Mix, I think was the day I bought Tom Mix film, the highlight. And I didn't have enough money. If I used the 15 cents to get myself back home again, I says, well, I'm not going to be able to buy this film. The film was like, I don't know, a couple dollars or so. It was real cheap. So, but if I spent the 15 cents, I wouldn't have quite enough to get it. So I spent the 15 cents on a film, added to my other change I had in my pocket, and bought the film, and I had to walk home because I didn't have the 15 cents for the bus fare. And at that time, it was about a 2-mile walk. But when you're 59, let me see, I'm going to count on my fingers now. About 16, I guess. I was somewhere in that age bracket. So that was nothing to me to walk, because I used to walk all over to these radio shops and TV shops and picking the guy's brains, and so to speak. And when he was working on something, I was probably more of a pest than anything else, but I learned a lot that way. I learned how to solder that way, because I used to take the solder and put it on the iron instead of putting the solder on the work and then bringing the solder to the work and the iron and doing it. So I learned things like that. So not all my learning came out of books. But anyways, those were the days. The city buses, 15 cents. Yep. And coffee. Well, coffee was a dime. I think it went up to 15 cents eventually too, but you know, you go into a regular restaurant, you get a refill. You can drink as many coffees as you want, you know. And of course, back then I drink my coffee blonde and sweet. But I can't take it that way anymore. I used to like a lot of cream in it and a lot of sugar. Now I take it with skim milk and a couple of Splendors, because I can't have sugar anymore. But those are the days. Now you go out, you got to spend $1.50 for a lousy cup of coffee. It's insane. You know,